Villa Rheinblick, Baden-Baden. This is one of the 50 million euro galas, as Fatima Al-Maghribi, the 28-year-old champagne and world service Grand Champagne. Suddenly, Sheikh al-Rashid began, with his 15 billion fortune as an oil billionaire, and with an Algerian waiter, humiliating 200 WP guests in Arabic, better and more. He doesn't know that Fatima, a graduate of Oriental Studies in Heidelberg, understands every word. Both beautiful and perfect in classical Arabic, we presented Sheikh Sal for much longer and much more. A hostess to be proud of, one of Germany's finest ladies. Fatima Al-Maghribi, of Villa Rheinblick, polished the marble floor with precision, along with the finest Islamic philosophy text. An example of Heidelberg University's greatest sacred uniform in Oriental Studies and Islamic Sciences was combined with an elegant headscarf and intense green. Alexander Villa Weber, Baden-Württemberg real estate mogul, towered over the hills of Baden-Baden like a jewel in the Black Forest. Every room told stories of wealth, with Baroque frescoes, crystal chandeliers from the Bavarian forest, and Persian carpets that cost more than Fatima earned in 5 years. 2 years earlier, Fatima had fled Morocco after receiving threats for publishing articles critical of the regime. Her father, a progressive imam from the Gelis district in Marrakesh, had taught her that knowledge was the only wealth no one could steal. She spoke classical Arabic, English, French, and German fluently, and possessed a deep knowledge of the Quran that put many male scholars to shame. But in Germany, her degree was worthless, like scrap paper. Her precarious residence permit, her foreign accent, the headscarf she wore proudly, all contributed to making her invisible to employers. So the brilliant academic who had debated Ibn Rushd and Al-Ghazali found herself cleaning toilets for people who didn't even know who these philosophers were. Alexander Weber had hired her 6 months earlier, more out of pity than necessity. He paid Fatima 800 euros a month to look after the villa when he was away on business trips. He treated her with distant respect, never suspecting that this quiet woman could recite entire passages of the Quran in classical Arabic and discuss Islamic theology with any imam. On this September evening, Villa Rheinblick hosted the most exclusive party of the year, a charity dinner to raise funds for Middle Eastern refugees. The irony did not escape Fatima, who, as a refugee herself, served at champagne to magnates who talked about helping people like her while treating her like a ghost. 200 VIP guests filled the illuminated gardens: oil barons, bankers, princes, industrialists. Fatima moved with quiet grace among them, filling glasses, collecting plates, overhearing conversations in 6 different languages. No one noticed her. No one really saw her. She was perfectly invisible. But invisibility, Fatima had learned, could be a superpower. The guests spoke freely in front of her about million-dollar deals, political scandals, secrets that would shake the financial markets. They regarded her as a piece of furniture, incapable of understanding their sophisticated conversations. They didn't know that this woman with a quiet step had a razor-sharp mind and a photographic memory that registered every detail. Around 10 p.m., when the champagne had loosened tongues and lowered inhibitions, Sheikh Khalid al-Rashid, the oil mogul from the Emirates with an estimated fortune of $15 billion, arrived. Tall, imposing, dressed in an immaculate white kandura, he entered the villa as if he were the master of the world. Al-Rashid was as famous for his arrogance as he was for his wealth. He owned oil wells, palaces in Dubai, 200 million yachts, soccer clubs. But above all, he possessed the conviction that money gave him the right to trample anyone he considered inferior. Fatima watched him from afar as he greeted other guests. He spoke English with a distinguished accent, smiled with that diplomatic falseness she knew well. But when he thought no one could hear him, when he spoke with his entourage of Arab assistants, the mask slipped, and what Fatima heard made her shudder. She did not yet know that this evening she would have to choose between invisibility and risk everything to defend the dignity of an Algerian waiter who was about to be humiliated before the Europe of the powerful. The moment of truth came when the Algerian waiter, a young man named Omar, accidentally spilled a few drops of champagne on the immaculate kandura of Sheikh al-Rashid. It was a tiny mistake, invisible to most, but enough to unleash the billionaire's fury. The sheikh rose violently from the table of honor and drew the attention of all the guests. The diplomatic smile vanished from his face, replaced by an expression of disgust and superiority that Fatima recognized all too well. It was the same look the powerful in Marrakesh had when they looked at the poor. Grandma, frightened, began to apologize in halting German and desperately tried to clean the stain with a napkin. His hands trembled. His face had turned pale. Fatima knew that this boy sent every euro he earned to Algeria to feed his family, and that losing this job meant condemning them to hunger. But al-Rashid was not satisfied with apologies. He began to speak in Arabic with that thunderous voice that filled the quiet garden. The 200 guests didn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. He publicly humiliated Grandma. The Sheikh's words cut through the air like sharpened blades. In classical Arabic, the sacred language of the Quran, which he desecrated with his hatred, al-Rashid called Omar a dog's child, a useless servant, a filthy Algerian who didn't know his place. He said that people like him didn't even belong in the presence of respectable people, that it was a mistake to let these animals serve at the tables of the superior. The European guests watched, ashamed but helpless. Some lowered their eyes, others whispered among themselves, but no one intervened. After all, al-Rashid was one of the richest men in the world, a valuable customer, a strategic ally. Who would have dared to contradict him? Oma endured the humiliation with his head bowed. Tears ran down his face. He didn't understand everything the sheikh said, but the tone and gestures made it clear that he was being publicly destroyed. His dignity was being trampled before the most powerful in Germany. Fatima felt the blood boiling in her veins. Every word al-Rashid spoke was a punch to the gut, not only because of the hatred it expressed, but because of the blasphemy it represented. This sheikh used the language of the prophet, the language of science and poetry, the language that had given the world Averroes and Avena, to spew hatred and contempt. Fatima's hands clenched the crystal tray until her knuckles turned white. She had spent years studying this language, understanding its beauty and depth, translating the great philosophers who had illuminated the medieval world. And now she saw that same language used as a weapon to hurt an innocent boy. The sheikh continued his venomous monologue, growing more excited by his own eloquence. He began quoting twisted and manipulated Quranic verses to justify his superiority, claiming Allah had created natural hierarchies and some people were destined to serve others. It was theological blasphemy that turned Fatima's stomach. The garden fell silent. 200 of Germany's most influential people witnessed this scene of pure malice, and no one lifted a finger. Alexander Weber seemed frozen, torn between the hospitality owed to a millionaire client and the revulsion at what he saw. In that moment, Fatima made the decision that would change her life forever. She could no longer remain invisible. She could not allow the language of her ancestors, the language of her faith, to be desecrated in this way. She could not allow Grandma to be destroyed without doing anything. She placed the tray on a table, resolutely adjusted her headscarf, and began walking toward the center of the garden. Her footsteps echoed on the old stones like war drums. The guests began to turn around, confused by this maid who dared to interfere in a scene that was none of her business. But Fatima did not stop. She had something to say, and she would say it in the most beautiful language in the world. Fatima stopped 3 meters in front of Sheikh al-Rashid, standing straight as a sword, her green eyes shining with determination. The silence in the garden was deafening. 200 people held their breath, sensing that something extraordinary was about to happen. As Fatima began to speak, her voice rang crystal clear in the evening air. But she did not speak in German or English. She spoke in classical Arabic, the language of pre-Islamic poetry, of the great philosophers of the Quran. Her pronunciation was perfect, each word formed with surgical precision. Al-Rashid froze mid-sentence, his mouth open in shock. His eyes widened as he realized that this insignificant maid not only understood every word he spoke, but spoke a more refined Arabic than he himself did. In classical Arabic, Fatima systematically dismantled every argument of the sheikh. She quoted Quranic verses on equality, hadiths al-Rashid didn't even know, theological references that exposed him as an ignorant charlatan. The European guests didn't understand the words, but they understood perfectly what was happening. The maid was teaching the billionaire a lesson. Al-Rashid tried to regain ground by citing his wealth and power. But Fatima was not intimidated. With icy calm, she reminded him that wealth without wisdom was like sand in the desert. She quoted Ibn Khaldun, Al-Ghazali, Averroes, each reference proof of her intellectual superiority. The most devastating moment came when Fatima recited pre-Islamic poetry by Imru al-Qais. Her voice transformed into music. The words danced in the air with a beauty that moved even those who didn't understand Arabic. It was pure poetry, dramatically contrasting with the vulgar hatred the sheikh had spewed. When al-Rashid made his final attack and accused her of being a woman who dared to contradict a man, Fatima smiled for the first time that evening. She spoke of the great women of Islam, Khadija, Aisha, Rabia al-Adawiyah. Then, as a final coup de grace, she looked al-Rashid straight in the eye. Knowledge knows no boundaries of race, class, or nationality. Only the ignorant believe that money can buy wisdom. The garden fell silent. Sheikh al-Rashid had been intellectually dismantled by a Moroccan domestic worker. Grandma looked at Fatima gratefully. Alexander Weber realized he had always had a lioness disguised as a lamb before his eyes. But al-Rashid was not the type of man to accept defeat without a fight. Sheikh al-Rashid, devastated by the public humiliation, desperately tried to salvage the situation. With a voice trembling with rage, he began threatening Fatima in Arabic, promising to ruin her life, to have her deported from Germany. But Fatima did not back down. On the contrary, she did something no one expected. Like this story? Give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Now let's continue with the video. She began to laugh, not mockingly, but out of genuine pity for a man who was so powerful yet so small. Still speaking in classical Arabic, Fatima began to tell her story. She explained that she was the daughter of an imam, summa cum laude graduate, expert in Islamic philosophy. She spoke of her academic articles, her translations, her escape from Morocco because she had dared to criticize authoritarianism. Alexander Weber approached and asked Fatima to translate for the guests. It was the first sign that the host was taking sides with his employee against the millionaire client. Fatima nodded and began repeating her story in German. Her voice was calm, professional, as if she were giving a university lecture. The effect on the 200 guests was electrifying. Suddenly, this invisible woman proved to be more educated than almost all of them combined. The most powerful moment came when Fatima addressed the guests directly. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight you are here to collect donations for Middle Eastern refugees. But how many of you truly know who these people are? She explained that she was one of those refugees they wanted to help. But she didn't need their charity. She needed their intellectual openness, their respect, the opportunity to put her skills to work for the country that had taken her in. Fatima concluded with a proposal that left everyone speechless. She challenged al-Rashid to a public debate on the true essence of Islam. If the sheikh won, she would leave Germany. If she won, al-Rashid would have to publicly apologize to Grandma and donate 1 million euros to integration organizations. The garden erupted in astonishment. A domestic worker had challenged one of the world's most powerful billionaires to an intellectual duel. Alexander Weber broke the deadlock. His villa would host the debate with Germany's top Islamic scholars as judges. In that moment, Fatima was no longer a domestic worker. She had become a warrior of culture, a champion of dignity, and the final battle was upon them. A week later, Willer Rindblick transformed into Germany's most exclusive intellectual arena. The debate between Fatima al-Maghribi and Sheikh al-Rashid had drawn the attention of international media, academics, and the upper class. Alexander Weber had kept his promise and assembled a prestigious jury, the director of the Oriental Institute at the University of Munich, the rector of Al-Azhar University Cairo, and 2 Nobel Prize winners in literature with expertise in Arab culture. The villa's garden had been set up as a modern amphitheater with 200 seats for Germany's most influential personalities. Cameras from half a dozen international broadcasters filmed every moment of what the newspapers had already dubbed the duel of the century. Fatima arrived in an elegant black suit and a damascene silk hijab, a gift from Alexander Weber, who wanted to show her his full support. She was no longer the invisible domestic worker. She was a woman of culture, about to represent millions of underestimated refugees worldwide. Sheikh al-Rashid Yashed appeared in his usual ostentatious manner, a flawless white silk kandura, followed by an entourage of advisors, hoping to assist him. But in an intellectual debate, money and power matter less than authentic knowledge. The moderator explained the rules. 3 rounds of 3 minutes each on 3 topics. The spiritual essence of Islam, the contribution of Arab culture to world civilization, contemporary Islam, and intercultural integration. Each participant had the right to cite texts, present counterarguments, and offer a conclusion. The first round began with the al-Rashid, who sought to impress the jury by reciting verses from the Quran from memory. But his interpretation was superficial, literal, lacking the theological depth that distinguishes the scholar from the mere reciter. Fatima waited patiently until he finished. Then she began to weave a narrative that left everyone speechless. She did not limit herself to quoting the Quran. She explained the historical context, the interpretations of great exegetes, the connections to the Judeo-Christian tradition. Her knowledge was encyclopedic, but never pedantic, profound yet always accessible. When al-Rashid sought to justify the superiority of Muslims over other peoples, Fatima demolished him by citing the verse that acknowledges the validity of all revealed religions. Her eloquence was poetic, her arguments unassailable. The second round was even more devastating for the Sheikh. Al-Rashid spoke about Arab contributions to mathematics and medicine, but superficially, textbook-like. Fatima, on the other hand, recounted the story of Al-Kindi, Al-Farabi, and Ibn Sina with the passion of someone who had dedicated her life to study. She explained how Arab philosophy saved Aristotle from oblivion and returned him to medieval Europe. She quoted Ibn Battuta, who had traveled more than Marco Polo, Al-Biruni, who had measured the circumference of the earth, Ibn Khaldun, who had invented sociology 5 centuries ahead of its time. Each name was accompanied by anecdotes, precise data, specific contributions that demonstrated a stratospheric education. But in the third round, Fatima showed her true greatness. Instead of attacking al-Rashid, she spoke about young European Muslims, their search for identity, the challenges of integration. Her voice became warmer, more human, as she told stories of success and failure, of hopes and disappointments. She explained how authentic Islam was compatible with European values, even enriching them. She spoke of Oma, the Algerian waiter, as an example of the dignity of work taught by the Quran. She transformed the debate from an academic confrontation into a lesson in humanity. Al-Rashid, increasingly desperate, attempted a final personal attack. He accused Fatima of being a rebellious woman who transgressed Islamic commandments. It was his final mistake. Fatima smiled and began reciting verses by Rabia al-Adawiyya, the great Sufi mystic. Then she cited the deeds of Aisha, the Prophet's wife and teacher of theology. She explained how Islam had given women rights unknown in Europe in the 7th century. Inheritance rights, divorce rights, the right to education. As the jury withdrew to deliberate, the verdict was already written in the eyes of the audience. Fatima had won so overwhelmingly that al-Rashid looked like an amateur next to a professional. The verdict was unanimous, a clear victory for Fatima al-Maghribi in all 3 topics. Sheikh al-Rashid had to keep his promise, a public apology to grandma, and €1 million for charity. But for Fatima, the real victory was something else. She had proven to the world that behind every domestic worker, every waiter, every refugee, there could be a treasure trove of knowledge and dignity just waiting to be recognized. 6 months after the debate that had gone around the world, Fatima al-Maghribi's life had changed radically. She no longer cleaned floors. She headed the Weber Foundation's new Center for Intercultural Studies, a research institute Alexander had created especially for her after recognizing the inestimable value of what he had always had before his eyes. Housed in an Art Nouveau villa overlooking the Black Forest, the center had become a reference point for scholars from around the world. Fatima led a research team working on the translation of medieval Arabic texts on cultural integration and interreligious dialogue. Her salary had risen from $800 to $8,000 per month. But above all, she had regained the professional dignity that had been denied her for too long. Sheikh al-Rashid had kept all his promises. He had publicly apologized to Oma at a press conference, which made headlines throughout the Middle East. acknowledging his own ignorance and arrogance. The promised €1 million had become 5. He had financed scholarships for refugees with university degrees, enabling dozens of people like Fatima to put their skills to work for Germany. But the deepest change had taken place within the Sheikh's own soul. Defeated but not destroyed, al-Rashid had asked Fatima to become his cultural advisor, recognizing that his wealth was empty without authentic knowledge. Their monthly meetings had become lessons in humility for the most powerful man in the Emirates. Oma, the Algerian waiter Fatima had defended that September night, was now the first beneficiary of a scholarship that allowed him to complete his engineering studies. Interrupted in Casablanca. In the evenings, he still worked as a waiter, but not out of desperation, out of dignity, to prove that there are no humiliating jobs, only people who ennoble them through their integrity. Alexander Weber had discovered that for 6 months he had hosted one of Germany's most brilliant minds. His villa had become a cultural salon where ambassadors, writers, and philosophers came to engage with Fatima. He himself had begun learning Arabic, fascinated by the richness of a culture he had always ignored. Willa Rinblick now hosted cultural events of international stature. The Fatima al-Rashid debate, as it had gone down in history, had become a case study at universities for sociology and communication. A domestic worker confronting a billionaire and winning with the weapons of culture. The perfect story to prove that knowledge really is the only wealth that cannot be stolen. A year after that memorable evening, Fatima received recognition that crowned her rebirth. Heidelberg University offered her a professorship in contemporary Islamic studies. She was the first Muslim woman wearing a hijab to receive such a prestigious position at the old German university. During the inauguration ceremony, Fatima gave a lecture titled Invisibility as Power, from the kitchen baths of Baden to the listening souls of Heidelberg. She told her story without rhetoric, with the same simplicity that had conquered the Garden of Villa Reinblick. She explained how the forced invisibility of migrants often concealed a wealth of knowledge that Germany refused to see. She cited alarming statistics: doctors washing dishes, engineers delivering pizza, professors cleaning toilets. An entire generation of wasted talent due to prejudice and bureaucracy. But she also spoke of hope, possibilities, change. Her case must not remain an exception, but must become a model. She proposed a system for the rapid recognition of foreign academic qualifications, programs for qualified labor integration, multicultural centers of excellence. Omar sat in the front row in a suit and tie with his newly acquired engineering degree. Al-Rashid sat next to Alexander Weber, two men who had stood on opposing sides that September night and now collaborated on sustainable development projects in the Mediterranean region. When Fatima concluded her speech with the Quranic verse about those who have received the reward of faith and knowledge, the Heidelberg Lecture Hall erupted in 10 minutes of applause. The invisible domestic worker had become one of Germany's most respected voices. But before everything was beautiful, it was possible to change destiny with the verification of knowledge and courage through an eye check. And money, the headscarf she had just made, now symbolized an intelligence that had conquered dignity, a battle won without a shot fired, a silent revolution that had paved the way for thousands of other Fatimas waiting to be recognized. If this story inspires you, leave a like, leave a comment. Did you buy something or earn more money? Do you believe that culture can truly overcome prejudice? To learn more, activate and enable Glock so that identity verification can be done later. Remember, Fatima transformed invisibility into strength, humiliation into redemption. True wealth lies not in money, but in knowledge and courage, in using it to defend dignity.